All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, in the wake of the police killing of George Floyd, an uncomfortable fact has emerged for Amy Klobuchar's VP prospects. Allow me to explain. As it turns out, 2 of the officers involved had previously been reviewed for use of force. The Guardian has that report. Derek Chauvin and Tao Thao had faced internal review for a number of incidents previously, but faced no disciplinary actions. You will know Chauvin as the officer who kept his knee on the neck of George Floyd, ultimately killing him. According to The Guardian, together these 2 officers faced a dozen different civilian complaints. Chauvin in particular was one of 5 officers placed on leave after shooting an indigenous man and was also involved in the shooting death of another man with a knife who had stabbed others and then reportedly turned on police. At the time, Amy Klobuchar was the county attorney, and she declined to prosecute Chauvin, leaving him on the streets and in position to kill George Floyd as he did in that horrific video. Now, a lot of news reports have framed this merely in the way that I did, frankly, as an inconvenient fact for Klobuchar and her quest to be VP. Just a little bump in the path of a politician's ambitions on her journey of self-expression, rather than a story of the way that power protects power and maintains the oppression of what they view as the American underclass, black men prime among them. But in fact, Amy's ascendance within the Democratic Party, the party overwhelmingly supported by black voters, the party that has adopted the mantle of racial justice, is actually a really important part of understanding what is unfolding right now. An American city is on fire. The National Guard has been called in. The president is tweeting about the military shooting looters. The police have arrested a team of American journalists. The 3rd police precinct has been set on fire. These are images that recall the unrest of Ferguson and Baltimore and LA before them. All these years, all these decades later, with so much talk and blather from politicians, yet here we are right back in the same spot, with a lot of folks who are frankly much more uncomfortable with this expression of outrage from citizens than with the police murder of citizens. And as you ask people to just trust in the process and wait calmly for an investigation to play out, you get reminders like this, that your efforts and your playing by the rules aren't likely to amount to much. Here's the current county district attorney, Democrat Michael Freeman, talking about that investigation.
I will not rush to justice. I'm going to do this right. And those folks who know me in the African community know I will do my very level best, but I will not rush justice because justice cannot be rushed. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute. And there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge.
Little context here, as Tenille points out over on Twitter. Within 6 months in 2018, the Minneapolis police arrested 47 people through sting operations against small-scale marijuana sales. 46 were black. Freeman's office charged all of them with felonies, which is to say he is not the person who will fix systemic racism in law enforcement. That's becoming pretty clear. Some ally you've got there, guys. Just can't understand why people who have watched their communities and their schools defunded and their lives devalued and their wages kept at poverty level with no ability to build wealth and having to live in fear of having some fragile white lady stick the cops on them or of being murdered by the cops in a city where that happens to black people 13 times more often than white people would resort to rioting when they've got such obvious pathways to redress. Just consider at a macro level, for example, the options presented to them at the presidential level. You got the Central Park 5 dude who worked with his daddy to deny black people housing and spent all his first-term political capital allowing multinational corporations to loot the public purse, so to speak. He's matched up against the guy who maybe more than any other modern political figure worked to construct the current system of mass incarceration, is totally unrepentant about it, served as credit card company masters for most of his time in the Senate, and then was part of an administration that failed to send one banker to jail for destroying the global economy and decimating, specifically in particular, the wealth of black homeowners. And this brings us back around to Amy. Now, as if Joe's not an amazing pick all on his own, his top VP contender is the lady who failed to prosecute George Floyd's killer when she had the chance. It's Charlottesville versus nothing will fundamentally change. And it's the perfect example of a type of heads we win, tails you lose system that makes it feel as if actual change will never be possible without resorting to radical means. Where will this actually lead? Riots and chaos, of course, are deeply disturbing to upper middle class white people, white women in particular. They'll do anything to restore order and predictability, which is the real reason why Trump has been so incredibly triggering for this particular demographic group. Neither party is remotely responsive to poor people, but they are highly attuned and responsive and practically obsessed with the needs, desires, and interests of the Karens of the world. In reality, the police work for Karen. That's why Amy Cooper was so comfortable calling them in the moment it occurred to her. mess with Karen's sense of stability and safety, and God knows what you're going to unleash. Look, I'm not looking to condemn these protesters. I'm not looking to glorify them either. This is an expression of rage for some, and for others, frankly, it's an opportunistic exploitation of a community's pain. Let's not pretend that these are all righteous revolutionaries. Let's also not pretend that their pain and their rage isn't understandable. Let's also have no illusions about the incredibly privileged position of cheering on a community's destruction from your safe and comfortable home. But what do you think you're going to get when you provide no obvious, peaceful means of redress? It's never been more clear or laid more bare who runs D.C., who runs the country, whose interests they represent, and the lengths they will go to in order to preserve the status quo. Last year, we covered the year of the protests when the world burned in seething outrage over corruption, over injustice, over inequality. That populist uprising has arrived here. Don't be shocked when it shows up in your town. Sagar, I don't think it's a surprise to us that the nation was somewhat of a powder keg and that a spark, you never know where it's going to come, but could set things on fire in the way that it has. And, you know, we've been covering this in the show. It's not only Minneapolis, it's Louisville, it's cities across the country that we're watching this unfold in.
Yeah, and I'm really glad in that last part what you were talking about, which is that don't condemn, don't, what you need to do is try to understand. Have compassion for people. We did that with the lockdown protesters. This is not selective outrage or selective compassion, which is that when people are put in a position where they feel like they have no redress, then they are going to resort to things that you don't necessarily want to see. I want to be clear, I think it's horrible that the city burned. I think the police abdicated their responsibility. The governor, this prosecutor, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Oh my God.
In terms of additional non-criminal evidence.
I mean, think about that, just to pause you for 1 second.
Right.
They arrested CNN journalists live on air, and George Floyd's killer is still at large.
So in this incident, we have had police officers who murdered a man. We have people who burned a city to the ground, including an affordable housing complex, by the way. And we have a journalist live on the air. Who's the person who gets arrested?
The journalist.
This is an abdication of law and order all around, right, left, no matter where you get, no matter which way that you look at it. And that's actually what really outrages me. And it's extraordinarily important for everybody to have compassion for people who feel as if they are in a situation which they cannot escape.
Right.
I have the utmost compassion for them. And for what it is right now is an abdication of leadership all around. Because, as I said, I mean, you have the Minnesota governor, you have the the Minneapolis mayor, firefighter, all of the authorities in this situation handled this absolutely terribly and are abdicating their responsibility to the actual city. And to their own citizens. I mean, you can see that prosecutor. This isn't a person, I don't know if he's elected or not, but I think he said he was a Democrat. You can see here, I mean, it's all in the perpetuation of their own power, of their own system, of their own, because the prosecutor, obviously, I'm sure is getting immense pressure from, whatever organization. He has to make sure all this, and it just, I do not blame anybody for feeling like the system doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
Because that's the core theme of the show. I completely understand. And as you said on the looting thing, it's something that I absolutely take to heart, which is we need to start referring to how much of big business and the way that they have treated this bailout in so much of the last 40 years in America, of our factories, of our hometowns, our citizens, all of that as looting as well. It should be an equal opportunity rhetorical thing that is employed at anybody who is stealing wealth or stealing anything in American society. So I think, once again, I mean, this is a core thing in my politics. I think we need to move towards the class line, which is that, as you said, and I actually looked into this after yesterday, which is that whenever we look at shootings, it's in communities that are poor. If you live in a majority white community which is poor, you're more likely to get shot. If you live in a black community which is poor, you're more likely to get shot. It is the poor in America who suffer the most from these things, and it is time that we actually try to do something for them.
Yeah,
That's something
it is.
That really bothers me.
Class and race and the intersection of all of this. And I think the other thing that we really have to understand is, obviously rightful outrage over the county attorney yesterday being like, well, there's some other evidence. We'll see. We don't want to rush to justice, right, while they're arresting a journalist live on the street, right? So there is the specific outrage. But also, what we have tracked and talk about a lot on this show is the way that for working class and for lower income people, especially in communities of color, the way that pain and that struggle is so, and especially right during this time. I mean, during this pandemic, when millions of jobs have been lost, people who couldn't afford a setback have been dramatically set back and pushed against the wall. And so, yeah, you're going to create an incredibly volatile situation. And when you look at it, and look, I'm not saying that this is like Joe Biden's fault or specifically Donald Trump's fault. Like, that's not the point. But the point is, if you look at this system and you see that you have no real options, when you look at decades and decades of peaceful protests and march after march, that doesn't really ultimately change anything, doesn't actually move the needle, you understand exactly how you end up in a moment exactly like this.
Yeah, I certainly do. I understand. I absolutely understand it. But we also have to say, there are a lot of opportunistic, terrible people there, right? I mean, that's ultimately what happened. Even many of the peaceful protesters themselves are very upset because there was that, I think there's a lot of speculation online about who is this guy who just like started the riot.
Right.
We have no idea who he is. Yeah, it was like, what? Like this random person comes through with a hammer? I mean, I saw, and again, this is a funny thing. It's not even race. I mean, the majority of the protesters I saw burning down that police precinct were white. So what is happening here? Clearly somebody has let this complete thing go astray, and the people of Minneapolis have been failed. George Floyd's family, who has been begging people to stop doing this, they have been failed both by some of these violent rioters, protesters, looters, etc., and by the county prosecutor.
Well, there's a caricaturish view, unsurprisingly, that is portrayed all the way around. So on the right, these are evil looters, savages, et cetera, and way more uncomfortable and upset about that than about the police murder. On the left, they're all glorious revolutionaries. When you're right? First of all, these protesters don't represent everyone in the community.
No. Yeah.
Second of all, it's very easy to be, here in our comfortable studio or, comfortable in your home cheering on destruction of a community that you don't live in.
Right.
But on the other hand, of course, you have to understand the roots of this and where it comes from. And so I think that's what we're trying to do here as we cover what is an outrageous, moment in American history. Already was an outrageous moment with what was unfolding with the pandemic, mass unemployment, and then you layered now riots in at least one American city and also in Louisville, Kentucky, where 7 people were shot in protest last night. It's unbelievable what we're watching unfold.
Yeah, certainly.
Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.